Hey everyone, Andrew here, and it is February again. Now, last year I did 4 reviews for February, all on romance books and stories, and yeah, I kind of overstretched myself a little bit with that one. I picked up a couple books that I fortunately didn't remember as well as I would like to when I reviewed them, and I didn't have as many books as I thought I would, so I ended up doing that Notebook review, which I actually liked my Notebook review. I thought it, because I do think that is a good adaptation. But yeah, I really overstretched myself with that, and I neither have the time nor the energy nor the real drive this year to try and do that again. So I'm gonna do probably two, at most three reviews this month of romance stories. So, and I'm not really certain what I'm going to be doing for my second and third review, but I decided for my first review I would do a little something different. And by that I mean a book called A Little Something Different. Now, this book is by Sandy Hall, and she's a very brand new up and coming writer. And the book is something I stumbled on at a Target, and just was sounded like an interesting concept because it's a love story told from 14 different perspectives. I'm like, oh, okay, that actually is something a little bit different. It is interesting to see. I'm interested to see how different people would view the same love story, and or different parts of that love story. That could be really interesting. I started the book, and it was like the first part was told from the roommate of the main girl's perspective. The main girl's name was Leah, and she bumped into a boy named Gabe on the way to her creative writing class. And the roommate could instantly tell there was a spark between them. She's like, oh, this will be a really good meet cute situation later. But there wasn't much there. I'm like, okay. And then get to the second chapter, which is told from the creative writing teacher's perspective. And she's always, every year, picks a couple that she wants to get together and tries to help push together. And she picked them out this year by catching their reference, which was pretty cool because the teacher just is leaning against the desk waiting for all the students to come in, and she gets started and she's like, I have a theory. And Leah in the back goes, that it's a demon? And Gabe looks at Leah and goes, a dancing demon. And the teacher goes, no, something isn't right there. And I'm already hooked because that's a Buffy and the Vampire Slayer reference. And that's a reference to my favorite episode from Buffy and the Vampire Slayer, which is the musical episode where they just go, we break into. That's the one of the best songs in that. It's just how it begins, and I'm like, all right, you got me, book. I'm hooked. I want to read more. And you get to the next chapter is all from Gabe's brother's perspective, and he's talking about how Gabe has been a little different since an incident that happened. We don't know what the incident is, and but still kind of interesting. And then the next part is from the perspective of a bench, like an actual bench, and it's talking about how it likes the feel of Gabe's butt. That's a very patient, wanting to experience the world butt, as opposed to his brother's butt or his friend's butt who's in a hurry to get moving. And I'm like, what the? No, I don't know. No. I, okay, so doing a perspective from an inanimate object isn't necessarily a bad thing. I don't have a huge problem with that if it does something or adds something to it. Like, The Giving Tree is a great kid's book that tells something from something's perspective of watching this kid grow up and doing that. You can do that if it adds something and tells something to the story. I do not, however, want a story told from a bench's perspective in regards to the feeling of people's butts. And then immediately it jumps to the perspective of a squirrel. And he's talking about how he loves nuts and how this girl gives him a nut and how he sees the connection between her and this other boy that's sitting on the bench across the way. And I'm like, Uh, can we get to a more important person's perspective on this? It's cute. The squirrel thing is kind of cute. Can we move on to? Can I get Gabe's perspective or Leah's perspective? I'm sorry. What? What do you mean? There's no chapters from their perspective? You have 14 viewpoints, and you don't have any of the viewpoints coming from the main characters? But that's the thing I like about romance books. And that's me. I like reading romance books that have some insight into how the main characters are looking at each other, how they think about each other, how they interact with each other. Because that to me is interesting to see how someone's how they view the person that they develop a crush on, how they can do something so mundane but for the person who's in love with them, that's the most beautiful, amazing thing in the world. That to me is the thing that draws me into romance books, and even watching how someone's viewpoint of someone changes as they get to know them and get to fall in love with them. Again, like my favorite romance book is Nerd in Shining Armor, because you get to watch this guy change in the main woman's perspective. He goes from the super nerdy, like, oh god, I hate him, to he's strong and wants to help me and is willing to do things because he likes me, and her growing as a character, you get that. But I wouldn't get any of that in that story, and that story would not be good if it was told from like the perspective of one of the palm trees in the area just watching them. And that's sort of that's sort of the biggest problem I have with this, besides the bizarre perspective of the bench and the perspective of the squirrel, is that everything that we hear about them liking each other is subjective. It's just other people pushing their thoughts onto this couple, or they say certain stuff like, "Oh yeah, she's interesting," or "Yeah, I like her." But you can also see from the way these characters are talking that while Gabe likes Leah, he's not doing anything to try and get her to notice him or like him. They don't really talk for a large portion of the story. I mean, I got to a point where it was around this 80-page mark, and they're both at a party, and Gabe drinks a lot to try and work up the courage to talk to her, because he wants to talk to her, because he does like her, and he drinks all this alcohol, and still doesn't talk to her. And at that point, I'm kind of like, how invested am I supposed to be in this relationship? Because this main guy, has said maybe 6 words to the main girl for over for over a third of the book. Because it's not a long book. It's only 200 and something. And yet, 80 pages in, he said not even 10 words to her. And I couldn't bring myself to keep reading it. And I actually jumped ahead and I read the last page, and yeah, no, they literally like just got together around the last couple pages. So I'm already like, oh, I'm kind of glad I just stopped reading this, because there's no way I would have been able to compel myself to keep reading more. And, because there's a couple factors that go into why I stopped. The first is the no perspective of the main characters, because that's something that I want. If I'm reading a romance book, I want at least a little introspective into what the main characters are thinking and what they're feeling. Not just from words, but from the thoughts. Because at this point, this book was basically a gossip rag for me. It's just, oh, hey, we've seen these two people hanging out together, so clearly they're in love. Like, yeah, and, it's like, did you hear about Tommy and Jessica? They've been making goo-goo eyes at each other all day across classes. Yeah, no, if I wanted that, I could get that from real life. There's enough gossip around in the real world to give me that. I don't need that from a book. That that's number one that made me stop reading. Number two is just the choices of perspectives, because there's always just like the inclusion of the bench and the squirrel is just so for me. My third thing is just the way it's kind of written. It's written in a style that's very, it's an easy read. But it's the way the chapters are done, because it's not done as chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. It's done as overarching chapters with sub-chapters. So in this one, it's a bit like a journal. So every overarching chapter is a month. So this is October, and then you'll get a chapter from this person's perspective, then this person's perspective, and each of these little sub-chapters is maybe 2 or 3 pages. And I'm someone who, I've trained myself when I read to stop, or at least pause at the end of every chapter to decide if I want to keep reading. Because those are usually a good place to stop. So books that are like this, where I'm stopping every 2 to 3 pages, take me a little while to read, because I have to stop and see if I'm even wanting to read more at this time, or if I want to do something else. And unless your book is extremely compelling, I'm not likely to pick it up right away. And this was most definitely not compelling. Like, I had to keep forcing myself to pick this up and keep reading it. And like I said, I only made it to about the 80-page mark, and I was planning to go to the 100-page mark, but I just couldn't. It took over a month to read 80 pages, and I could read 80 pages in an hour and a half without much trouble. So it was rough for me. I went and looked at a bunch of reviews on this and a couple people's different thoughts and different opinions on it, and I kept coming across this word that summed this book up very well. And every single one of them used it, and it's cute. This book is cute. It's not very deep. It's not very compelling. It's not even all that interesting, but it is a cute, simple love story. The only thing of any interest in it is the multiple perspectives, but I don't think the writer has enough there to make this work. I think if she had included the actual main characters as part of the perspectives, I could give this book a lot more slack than I'm giving it. But the reason I read romance, the reason that I like reading romance, is the main people falling in love and seeing from their perspectives how they look at each other and how they think about each other. And I've read some that are third person that you don't actually get much introspective on what's going on in their heads. But this is like third person perspective from a third person perspective. So it's like you're not even getting a first hand account, you're getting this like the sixth hand account. And that to me was just uninteresting. Is this the worst book I've ever read? No, of course not. It's not even close. Is this the worst romance I've read? No. There's a lot worse out there. For me, there's just nothing really interesting or compelling to make me keep reading this. This is cute at best. So, yeah, I can't recommend it. If a story told from multiple perspectives that's just lighthearted and cute sounds good to you, please go ahead, give it a look. But honestly, if this is not something that I can recommend with any real gusto. So yeah, no, that's my review for this one. I'll probably be doing another romance review this month, if not 2. We'll see. I haven't decided. That's all for now. Happy reading.